Hey guys, welcome to Y&R Daily Update YouTube channel. Young and the Restless Spoilers reveal the truth about Sally and Kane's past, leaving Billy stunned. Sally had buried the secret without knowing it until Billy found the photo in her locker. Since Billy threw himself into the fight to get Chancellor back, he has pushed every relationship to the breaking point, including Sally. His obsession with winning has driven him to extremes, always suspicious of any connection that could undermine his position. But even a skeptical person like Billy never expected to one day face Sally's most buried secret. A short-lived annulled marriage between her and Kane, the man Billy considered his arch-rival. That secret is not only a heavy burden on Sally's heart, it is a fuse that can destroy what remains fragile between them. At the same time, providing Kane with the perfect weapon to turn the entire power game. The explosive link comes from a piece of Los Angeles' past that seemed to have faded into the dust. Before she set foot deep in Genoa City, when Sally was still reeling from her fashion ambitions and risky bets, she met Kane just as he was teetering on the edge of a series of setbacks at Chancellor. An impulsive trip to Vegas, a stormy night of pride and abandonment, a hastily arranged wedding under the guise of young madness, and then a quick annulment with a silent bond, all cleaned up as if they had never happened. But Vegas has never been a place to bury things forever. Moisture-proof copies of papers, a forgotten notarized signature in an old file, an anonymous email leaked at the right moment. All waiting for the right moment to come back to collect. The moment comes just as Billy is about to make a move to gain a decisive advantage over Chancellor Winters. A file was dropped into his inbox. No message, just a scan of the marriage certificate and the annulment. Sally's name stood next to Kane's like a cold knife. For Billy, this was more than a hidden secret. It was a mark of betrayal in a context where he was already struggling with all sorts of doubts about his loyalty. For Sally, it was worse than she could have imagined. She feared less the law or the press than the fact that Billy, the man she had tried to be a better person to deserve, would see her as a complete liar. The shock spread in the Genoa City way, fast, deep, and dirty. Kane, who had the timing, was deaf in dropping the information into the right ears. Audra, sensing leverage, flirted with the PR gray area, ready to turn a broken marriage into a conflict of interest story, asking if Sally had ever had access to data or strategies from Kane to trap Chancellor. Lily is in the eye of the storm, torn between her broken memories of Kane and her duty to protect Chancellor Winters from a scandal over her interests. Devon, sober as ever, warns that it's not about the affair, but about the perception of the market and shareholders. If Billy, a man of influence, loses control, the whole company will pay. Jack sees in his brother's eyes the look he fears most, a mixture of pride and an addiction to feeling right. He knows Billy will want to turn his pain into a counterattack. But this is not a battleground that can be won with a sledgehammer. Jack chooses to protect Sally to the extent possible, not so much because he loves her as because he understands that the current media disaster only serves to benefit Kane. Diane is cautious, reminding Jack that the line between protection and indulgence is thin. Any misstep could send the Abbott spiraling into a vortex of distrust. Sally, momentarily cornered, is forced to face what she has been avoiding, telling the whole truth. There was no pink in her confession. It was a fragmented picture of a time of fumbling, survival-mindedness, where she and Kane had used each other as a temporary crutch to escape their own fears. She explained why she had ended it early, why she had signed the non-disclosure agreement, why she had not told Billy, not because she thought little of him, but because she was afraid of losing him. But fear, when it became a reason, was always seen as an excuse. Billy listened, and all he saw was a gnawing void of trust. He understood that she had not betrayed him in the present, but he also understood that his old enemy had once been where he should have been, her husband, if only for a few days. Welcome back, Y&R Spoilers. Young and the Restless Spoilers reveal the latest information about Genoa City opens a very tense knot. Sally realizes that Billy's steps have crossed the line of safety. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. More than just a power play in the corporate world. This is a spiral that can turn into a tragedy of Kane. With his reckless nature and his morality bent to benefit, discovers that Billy is playing a double game. In Sally's eyes, Billy seems to be fascinated by the prospect of instant victory, promises of starry skies, spectacular shortcuts, and priceless promotions. But Sally, who is paid with her career and heart for hasty moves, understands that there is no such thing as a free victory. She foresees a bloody end if she does not pull Billy out of the dangerous orbit, where Kane is ready to deal with anyone who dares to betray, especially someone as important and innocent as Billy. Therefore, Sally chooses the only path she believes is still effective: Jack Abbott. She arrived at the Abbott residence in a state of half urgency and half remorse, clutching her handbag as she tried to regain her composure. Diane opened the door, her eyes alert, the trademark of a wife who had learned to keep the Abbotts out of fire. When Sally said she needed to see Jack, Diane instinctively assumed it was Billy again. It was, but not in the Billy hurt Sally kind of way. This time, Sally believed that only Jack had the credibility to stop Billy from running into the tiger's mouth. Jack might be the only one who can convince Billy to see things, Sally said. Her words no longer the plea of an ex-lover, but the warning of a reluctant ally. Diane, though not entirely convinced, understood the urgent pulse in Sally's voice. She told Sally to call Jack right away, because if she waited until late in the evening, things might be too far gone to save. When the call connected, Sally told him every detail. How Billy had been seduced by the project Kane had promised. How Billy had secretly designed a separate escape route, which would instantly make him a target if Kane found out. Sally didn't sugarcoat it. She simply painted the strategic picture. Kane wanted an ally who wouldn't ask questions, and Billy was dreaming of being an equal. Those two lines never intersected at an equilibrium point. It was in that gap that tragedy often blossomed. However, Jack's first answer, colder than Sally had expected, was like pouring cold water. He didn't want to interfere further with his brother's choice. The months of struggling in the battle between help and damage had taught Jack a painful truth. The more you are held back, the more you want to break free. Billy was too stubborn, always doing what he wanted. Any advice from Jack would most likely only make him rush faster to prove that he didn't need anyone to lead him. But that apparent indifference did not quell Jack's inner anxiety. Later, in a rare quiet moment at the club, Jack confided in Nikki. He admitted that he was worried about his brother. Billy was looking to Kane as the answer to all his dreams, not just financially, but also to his wounded pride. Worse, Billy had begun to shut out all dissenting voices, including Jack's own. Kane promised Billy the moon and the stars, Jack said. And in return, Billy returned his own investment, a rash declaration of independence that he no longer needed a family. For Jack, the act of returning the money was more than a statistic. It was a sign of a state of mind. Billy was locking the door to every safe exit, accepting the step into a room with only one window, looking out onto nothingness. Nikki listened, her eyes the eyes of someone who had fought too many battles at the cost of pride. She understood men like Kane, men who were only loyal to results. Nikki did not exactly love Billy, but she understood Jack and knew that if Billy fell, the Abbotts would bleed again. The battles between Newman and Abbott were longer than epics, but there were times when the common enemy was so dangerous that both families temporarily laid down their swords. Nikki advised Jack, if he still had any influence, to use it, but Jack hesitated. He knew that any hasty intervention would only make Billy more stubborn. Ironically, his heart wanted to rush forward, but his mind kept him still. At that moment, Victor appeared like a cold wind pulling all his emotions back to reality. He was not happy to see his wife talking intimately with her old enemy. The Newman Abbott war never lacked a cause to flare up, and Victor was not used to seeing Nikki confide in Jack. But before the old rivalry could even flare, Jack's phone rang.
It was Diane.
Her voice serious. Sally needed to talk about Billy. There was something new, something serious. Jack interrupted Victor's unpleasant conversation and told Nikki he had to go. Nikki's eyes were filled with relief and worry. This was the moment Jack needed to be there, not to lecture, but to listen and calculate. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. After Jack left, the room was left with two people who had faced off many times on the battlefield. Nikki was calm, not raising her voice, but her words were sharp. Kane was the enemy. And if Kane was luring Billy into a minefield, both Newman and Abbott were at risk of contagion in business and in family politics. Nikki proposed what would have seemed crazy to her just a day ago. Victor and Jack should team up temporarily to defeat Kane. Not a peace treaty, but a short-term campaign that struck a common sore spot. Victor listened, his smile tinged with traditional irony. But he was also pragmatic. In any war, only the objective is sacred. If removing Kane would save Newman from a market shock and see Abbott pay less, it was a sound investment. Victor had long believed that the best way to discipline the Abbotts was to let them suffer the consequences. But when those consequences threatened to fall on his turf, his tolerance ran out. While at Abbott, Sally unearthed evidence that Diane could not deny. The verbal agreements were so expansive, the numbers painted like landscape paintings, too beautiful to be true. But what made Diane shudder was not the expected profits, but the invisible clauses that every Kane-like partner assumed: absolute loyalty, absolute secrecy, and absolute obedience. Billy, who always needed to feel respected, did not realize that the co-chair that Kane had set up for him was just a stage prop. At curtain call, the props were removed, leaving only the main actor, Kane. Sally also admitted her mistake. She had waited too long, hoping that Billy would come to his senses. But when she glimpsed that Billy might be preparing a backup to avoid being dependent, she understood that her actions could turn him into prey. Kane could forgive mistakes, but never betrayals, even if they were only half-written thoughts on scrap paper. Jack came and sat across from Sally, not as a judge, but as a brother about to do the hardest thing in life: pull his brother back from the abyss, without making him hate him. He asked Sally for every detail, not a loophole in a contract, a schedule, a middleman who had appeared around Billy. With each piece of information, Jack pieced together a risk map. The only advantage left was time, which was still on their side. Because Kane was playing a long game of seduction, he needed Billy to believe he was going in, not being pulled. That gave Jack a narrow window to get in, not to block with orders, but with facts. Jack knew Billy's reflex was against authority, but he couldn't resist the hard facts. Sally as witness would read the presentations while Diane would play reasonable doubt, asking questions that Billy would have to answer for himself, lest he be seen as impulsive. In another direction, Nikki began to design a framework for cooperation with Victor. She was not naive enough to believe that Victor and Jack would walk into the same room holding hands, but she understood that Victor had a news network that Jack did not, and vice versa. If the connection was silent, through trusted informants, the two sides could pin Kane in a stalemate. Newman would clear the financial front, playing on the opaque money lines. Abbott would handle the human front, pulling Billy out and delegitimizing the story Kane was telling other investors. When both fronts were tight, an empire builder like Kane would be exposed. Late in the afternoon, information leaked about Billy's withdrawal from an internal fund to Victor, a piece of the puzzle that fit Jack's words. Billy had returned the investment as a way to cut the cord with his family to show independence to Kane. Victor picked up the phone, a short call, no specific recipient, but the message was clear. I want to know everything about Kane in the last 72 hours. Who went in, who went out, where the money stopped for an unusually long time. On the other side of the city, Jack also finalized the plan to meet Billy not at the office, but at a place associated with good memories, where he could tell his brother that sometimes growing up isn't about standing alone in the storm, but about holding the right hand before the storm hits. Sally, after all, suddenly felt a little lighter. She didn't know what the outcome would be tomorrow in Genoa City. All plans were certain until another secret was revealed. But at least she didn't fold her arms. She chose to stand on the side of truth, even if it meant facing a cranky Billy, a tough Jack, a suspicious Diane, and a calculating Victor. Strangely enough, in the maze of families, Sally, the outsider once considered trouble, became the right alarm bell, forcing powerful people to stop and look down the abyss. The night ended. The links began to interlock. Nikki placed the draft of the temporary alliance on the table in a place where only Victor could see. Jack left the mansion with a plan to approach Billy based on facts, not on authority. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. Diane coordinated quietly, double-checking all the strange appointments around Billy, preparing nailed questions that he couldn't avoid. And Sally, for the first time in weeks, let out a sigh. If tomorrow was a confrontation, at least today they had put up a fence. And somewhere out there, Kane, a man accustomed to bending all the rules, may not have known that the two arch-rivals were quietly preparing to join forces. Because in Genoa City, the most dangerous enemy was not the Newmans or the Abbotts, but the illusion that one could weather the storm alone. Billy had believed in that illusion for too long. It was time for someone, not with orders, but with truth and love, to bring him back to Earth before the starry sky turned out to be nothing more than a dark ceiling with no exit. Genoa City has a way of testing the most stubborn of hearts. And tonight, when Jack returned home, he immediately sensed the Abbott mansion was heavy with the atmosphere of a storm brewing from things everyone knows, but no one dares to name. Sally waited in the living room, her hands clasped together until they were white, her eyes a mixture of anger and regret. She didn't beat around the bush. She said it all, not just his reputation, not just the broken Abbott communications, but their relationship, just to satisfy her obsession with getting Chancellor back. "He's blind by all accounts," Sally said, her voice breaking in the midst of a painful truth. She was losing him bit by bit, decision by decision, like watching someone drive into a stormy night without lights or a map. Jack listened, and his first response chilled the room. We'd been through this with Billy before. It wasn't that Jack was insensitive. Instead, it was the voice of someone who had experienced his brother's impulse regret again, impulse cycle enough, and knew that any attempt to pull him back by hand would only send him running farther. Jack immediately asked what he had put into his standard yardstick, whether this new slide was related to the cancellation of the Abbott Communications launch. Sally nodded and said it as succinctly as an obituary. The company is now bankrupt. But she also added too clearly to deny, I'm here for Billy. Either way, she was on this side because loving someone isn't just about being there when they're shining. It's also about standing by when they're lost. The problem was the only way out Billy could see wasn't the legal way. Sally exposed Kane's plan, a new AI program marketed as walking through firewalls like a walk that could infiltrate corporate networks and take control of the accounting systems. Jack responded like any experienced leader. That's impossible. Our security systems are built to prevent that scenario. But Sally wasn't there to argue technically. She was there to warn cognitively. This thing is invisible, Jack. It doesn't need to crash. It just needs to make the balance sheet look mismanaged. Partners leave. Shareholders panic. Reputation bleeds. In a world where trust is currency, a clever financial distortion can be more devastating than a loud attack. Worse, Sally confessed that Billy didn't want to use the AI to take down Newman Enterprises outright. He wanted to use it as leverage to force Victor to sign a sponsorship contract with Chancellor, a form of blackmail sugar-coated with the language of strategic partnership. And adding fuel to the fire, Billy also plotted to force Victor to release the money that, according to him, Jack had withdrawn from Abbott Communications earlier as a replacement to get him back on his feet. Jack looked at Sally, his brow furrowed so deeply that there was no room for ambiguity. Sally, I didn't withdraw the money. Billy told me straight up that he didn't want my money. In that moment, all of Sally's ups and downs came to a screeching halt. Billy had lied to her. He had invented the Jack withdrawing plot just to convince her to go along with his crazy plan, to turn her objections into guilt, to turn her conscience into an obstacle to be removed. The familiar rhetoric of the blind. If someone won't stand with you, shame them for not standing with you. Diane, who had been observing silently all along, spoke up with a cold but not cruel reason. She pointed out that Billy was pushing away every hand that wanted to hold him back. Freedom of choice did not mean freedom to harm others, nor did it allow for the exchange of right and wrong with the good intentions on the tongue. Sally turned to Jack, her composure cracking. "You are his brother. You have to do something." This was no longer a plea for altruism on Billy's part. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. It was a cry for help for all those who would be affected if his obsession became a time bomb. Shareholders, employees, partners, and even relatives who were in the crosshairs of a victor who would never let anyone use intimidation. Jack walked slowly to the window, looked out at the garden that had seen too many storms, and sighed. He understood Sally's pain, but he also understood the cruel lesson that his brother, his leader, had to learn. There were sinking situations, and the more you tried to save them with your bare hands, the more you dragged them both down. Jack didn't deny the seriousness. He knew the law. He knew that the word AI didn't make hacking and data manipulation a technological joke, but rather a calculated punishment. He looked at Sally and said what she feared most. If Billy keeps this up, he could go to jail. Diane nodded, adding the needle that sealed the picture. And before he goes to jail, he'll have done enough damage that the rest of us will struggle for years to recover. But then Jack settled on the conclusion he believed was right, even if it was heartbreaking. "I've let him go, Sally. He'll have to sink or swim." It wasn't abandonment. It was an acknowledgement of the limits of our ability to save. The greatest pain in love is sometimes not watching someone you love fall, but understanding that every ladder you build just makes them climb higher into the illusion, only to fall harder. Billy always went his own way, and too often the wrong way. If Jack built another bridge, he might inadvertently pave the way for another fall. Sally bit her lip until it bled, but she did not cry. "What have I done? Why am I ruining my life for this?" she asked in the hoarse voice of someone who had been through every kind of lie, confusion, and self-reproach. "What have I done? How did I ruin my life for this?" The question was not directed at Jack or Diane. It was directed at the mirror she would face one day. She realized now that the consequences would not only be the loss of Billy, something she had feared from the beginning, but also the loss of her identity if she continued to be drawn into a plot that had been red-flagged from the start. Diane added, but more gently, "You will not ruin your life if you stop now." It was an invitation to turn back, not as a future Abbott daughter-in-law, but as a woman who had been crushed by prejudice and still chose to rise. Jack, in the end, didn't promise her what she wanted to hear. He only promised the one thing he could control. He would protect what could still be protected: family, company, innocent people from the explosion Billy was about to set off if he didn't stop. And so Jack's plan, despite its name, wasn't about sitting back. He wouldn't fund the illusion. He wouldn't shield the criminal activity with the coat of arms of his family. But he would put in place layers of prevention, alerting cybersecurity to raise the alert level to red, cordoning off any potentially scandalous data interfaces, activating independent cross-verification procedures so that any smell of misinformation would be caught while it was still a number on paper. He would also talk to the Chancellor's most influential people. Not to smear Billy, but to set a clear moral bar. Any cooperation based on intimidation was a one-way street to ruin. Meanwhile, Sally, if she truly wanted to save Billy, would have to tell him straight out that she was backing out of the plan. Not because she hated him, but because she loved him enough not to be an accomplice to his mistakes. Love, even if it hurt, had to choose the right side. The Genoa city night passed slowly, and the stars above remained calm, as if uninvolved in the bargaining of men. But inside the Abbott house, an old lesson was being rewritten in new ink. The allure of short-lived victory was as seductive as a sweet promise, and the man named Billy somehow always heard it more clearly than all the other warnings. Tomorrow morning, he would continue on his way, perhaps straight into Victor's fists, perhaps straight into the cold room of the investigation agency, unless at the last moment he saw what Sally had seen tonight, a mirror reflecting a man who had let his obsession consume him. If he stopped, the story would be about a late adult. If not, the story would be about a legacy burned by its heir. For Jack, letting go was not surrender. It was the ultimate pledge of kinship. When all bridges were burned, at least he would hold this side to have a place for Billy to return to if he ever got the chance to return. Subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with the latest news. Subscribe our channel for more latest update.